but then I got a cheap amplifier, a Kalamazoo amplifier. And then when it looked like I was going to stick with this, I got my first real guitar, which was a 1963 powder blue Jaguar Fender used.
Do you still have it?
No. I
God,
know.
you know how much that would be worth now?
I know. It's out there somewhere. One day I'll find it. But I ended up trading that guitar when I was in college. So I had it all the way to college, and I traded it for like a 1970, I looked up the serial numbers, a Les Paul Deluxe. And so had I known, and I always said I should have never gotten rid of that guitar. And ever since then, I probably now have 50 guitars. I've never sold a guitar and would never consider selling a guitar. So that was the one big mistake. But I was known in my neighborhood for having the largest and loudest amplifier. I had a Fender Super Reverb that stood on a Marshall set of speakers that was about 9 feet tall. And so when I was playing guitar, the entire neighborhood knew I was practicing. So I had the reputation of being the loudest, certainly not the best.
How did your parents feel about this? If you were playing literally in the garage, I mean, you weren't doing gigs, you didn't have a rehearsal space, you were playing this at home?
In the basement.
In the basement.
Well, I guess part of the answer is my father was deaf in one ear, so it only bothered him half as much. And I didn't really play that much. You know, it was usually in the afternoons, and my mom tended not to be home or would leave the house. But we had band practice in my basement, and it was a great time. It was just like, it was the cool stuff.
So your involvement with the guitar and with music and with bands throughout your teenage years and your young adulthood was always just a hobby? You knew right from the beginning you weren't going to pursue this?
I knew, I never had any aspirations. I think had I taken lessons at an early age as opposed to teaching myself and, in a pre-computer world where you can go to the internet and probably find out anything you want, I was very much self-taught or learned a song from the other guys in the band, most of the time playing it the wrong way. I never had real technique, and I'll come back to sort of how some of the music evolved. I actually started in the 90s when I started studying with Alan, but it was really never a serious thought to become a professional musician. I would have loved that, and in my next life maybe I'll come back as a professional musician, but it's really just a major hobby and the one constant in my life. It's been rock and roll.
In those bands, did you play lead or rhythm guitar?
I tended to be lead. I think the word would be serviceable for an 8th grade rock band. I'm trying to think of the songs that we even played. I'll try and remember. We did Painted Black. Now You've Got Your Diamonds. Oh God, what's the Stone song? Don't put.
Ruby Tuesday.
No, not Ruby. No. Oh my God. Don't Play with Fire. Don't Play with Fire, I think is. And they were all tended to be 1 or 2 string leads. We did some of the Ventures. We did Wipeout. Louie. I lost my closest friend from our band when we decided we were going to do Louie with the full lyrics, and he walked out.
Do you know what the lyrics are?
Oh yes.
Nobody knows those lyrics.
Oh no, I have the book Louie. It's the whole story of Louie and the Kingsmen. It's actually a great story. I mean, it's a great story about one of the reasons nobody really knows the lyrics is the lead singer for the Kingsmen, and I guess it was in a studio in Seattle. The mic was too high, and he was wearing braces, and hence the age-old mystery of what the real lyrics were. So anyway, we did all the classic numbers, but never very good, but just enough to be cool enough to have been in a band. That was the currency of the realm at the time. Background vocals. I was not a good singer.
Okay, so you started taking guitar lessons. Why? As an adult?
Well, throughout college, I found people to play with, and we would, as I said, my loud amplifier was my hallmark, and it was big equipment. Played with a number of different people, never performed, just played in the basement of the fraternity house, heavily into grand funk. Okay, so we would do a lot of one song for 45 minutes and kind of move on. Yeah, it would drive most people crazy, but it was fun. I started getting a little bit into, particularly Yes. That was the first time I really started to appreciate some of the directions of rock, and it evolved from traditional 3-chord, rock and roll to I was always intrigued. The Led Zeppelin kind of blew me away. Little did I know how they were doing it, and that was probably one of the most important influences. But in terms of
what do you mean? Little did I know how they were doing it?
Oh, I mean, other than the tunings, it was like a whole new sound. It was not traditional 3-chord rock and roll.
The interesting thing about Led Zeppelin, since, we can just talk and keep this going, but you're not going to use this. But having been with them so much in the 70s on tour and watching them and knowing them so well, they did, many ways, musically, what you did in terms of reading about Galileo and going off in all these other directions, because Jimmy Page cared as much about the blues as he did about the incredible string band, or bands like Kaleidoscope. One thing would lead to another, and all those influences came together to sort of make that sound, which was all over the place. It wasn't one thing.
Yeah, and it
was much more than met the eye, basically.
Yeah, and it was. It started, I'm trying to remember, Dazed and Confused was sort of my introduction to Led Zeppelin. But then when you got into, as each progressive album came out, it was almost as dramatic as the evolution of the Beatles. So, I kind of followed that, but it was something I never thought I would be able to play Led Zeppelin songs properly. That was an unachievable goal.
So was there a point where there was a goal that you wanted to play better, and that's why you started taking guitar lessons, or what?
I think there actually is a point where I decided, when I started my business career, and you get very much pulled into, trying to build a career and become successful and working too many hours in the day, and realize you become a very monochromatic, monolithic personality, just focused on it. I really felt I needed some sort of creative outlet. And I ran into a friend of mine, an acquaintance, can't even really say he was a friend, and we somehow started talking, and he was working at one of the major advertising agencies, but he was actually performing in a band. And he said, hey, why don't you come down and see my band? And they played a lot of Steely Dan, a lot of sort of that jazzy Steely Band kind of music. And I said, I really ought to go take some lessons. So I kind of watched this guy perform. He had a Paul Reed Smith guitar, which Paul Reed Smith had just come out. And so that was probably when I started buying new guitars. This has got to be about I guess it's around 1989, 1990. And I said, I've got to go find myself a guitar teacher. And I went into Rudy's on 48th Street and met up with Dean, who's been there forever, still there today, and said, hey, Dean, who can teach me to play guitar? I need to get a lesson. And he said, well, there's this guy, wrote down Alan Schwartz's name. He said, he's one of the best teachers out there. You ought to go see Alan. So I called Alan and said, got your name from Rudy's, and I'm interested in taking some lessons. And he said, he was kind of almost interviewing me at first to see if I was worthy to come take lessons with him. And that was the beginning, and I went down to Alan's, and that sort of was the whole beginning of the next phase of my my musical career, or avocation, as they say.
And while you were taking lessons with Alan, were you writing songs, or?
We started off, it was very interesting. He doesn't say anything like for the first 2 sessions. He just listens, which is very unnerving. So he would say, play your Honky Tonk Woman, play your Stairway to Heaven, play it. And he just sits there going, And he finally said, man, you got some serious timing problems. And I said, yeah, I know. I've never had timing. And we spent probably the first 6 months just working on basic rhythms and what we call the chicka chicka exercises, and how to actually strum a guitar, hold the pick properly. So it started off very much in basic technique. And then kind of as things evolved, by the early 1990s, I decided I needed to write a lullaby for my daughter. And I had done a little bit of writing before then, but that was the first true song that involved both melodies and recording and vocals, etc.
Why did you want to do that?
I don't know. It felt like I loved music, was learning more, becoming certainly an okay player, not to perform in a band, but I was pleased with my progress, and kind of as I got into this open G tuning, a whole new world unfolded, and so I started writing music in open G tuning, and one of those songs was a lullaby for my daughter. I actually did do one other major composition, simply entitled CMH1, and it was written
That's
in
your initials?
Yes, and so my first three songs were CMH1, CMH2, and CMH3. But what I learned about the open G tuning were very different voicings, and and chords that not only could I not name, but Alan and some of the other people who started listening. It was just sort of what we call 5-fret chords that were totally bizarre. But it was just part of this experience of exploring open G tuning. And I literally played for almost 4 years, never even played with standard tuning. So as I started writing music, it was almost exclusively written in open G tuning. So, and I actually have a little video of going into the studio to do CMH1, and Alan organized a band, and Jane filmed the whole thing, and it was a hoot.
Are there lyrics?
Never had lyrics.
Okay, great.
You had no idea?
About a lot of this stuff.
Oh.
It's interesting to me too. Okay, so you wrote the lullaby, you wrote the CMH trilogy. What does M stand for, by the way?
Mitchell.
You wrote the CMH trilogy, you wrote the lullaby, you started thinking of Galileo as a rock star, and how did you start to begin to think that you even wanted to take this interest in Galileo and do something musically with it?
Well, around this time, I became interested as I was becoming a parent, not a parent, but a father, that children's education was something that was near and dear to my heart, and I actually started writing a children's book with my wife, and I was just very attracted to doing something in the creative sphere as fatherhood was coming upon me, and realizing that my life was about to change profoundly. And so I don't remember exactly how it came, but the idea of using music as an educational tool just hit me, and I started working on a number of different ideas and thoughts, and said, gee, what if you could teach history, which I always had found dull and boring until basically when I was in college, and I had this wonderful professor, Dr. Redding, Doc Redding as he was known, who turned history into these amazing stories. And he was bombastic, and he was histrionic, and he would pound the table, and he would shout, and I was riveted by his style, and said, if you really can bring history to life, everybody would love history. It wouldn't be this dry, cut and pasted series of dates and places. And so I sort of had this idea of saying, well, what if I took this story that I'm becoming fascinated with, the whole Galileo epic, and maybe it could be told musically.